As a self-proclaimed independent baddie, I have to admit, a healthy relationship taught me more about myself than any self-help book ever could. Turns out being loved the right way is the biggest ego check of your life. Who knew? If you watch my last video, I have on the same outfit, just the same day. Lizzie McGuire, you're an outfit repeater. Let's get comfortable. Okay? I've always been very independence driven. Maybe you can relate. But even as a kid, one of my favorite phrases was, I can do it myself. So it runs deep. If I would have told younger me that a man was going to be the catalyst for some of the biggest growth in my life, I never would have believed it. So let me just tell you about my own personal ego check, right? It's wintertime right now in Chicago, and I miss the birds. And I mean like the flying birds, not the pigeons that practically take the public transit. All right, so for me, I found that a lot of my past relationships and friendships would trigger this abandonment wound that I had. Do I know where it came from? But inside of me, this manifested as a disorganized attachment style, which leaned more avoidant the older I got, because I would stay in relationships and friendships just too long. Definitely more for the potential than the actual relationship itself. There was always just this imbalanced energy, like even in friendships where I was always giving so much. Like my time, my energy, my support and love, but not getting much back. Early on in my life, any relationship or friendship that ended, it felt like it was dramatically, and I always felt blindsided because I was only focusing on what I was giving. And that's because I didn't really know what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like. And it was like a pattern because I always used to tell myself, like, oh, if we both would have just like tried harder, it would have worked. Like they would do something like super hurtful or super painful, and I would still be like, we just would have tried harder. Like, no, that was just a shitty thing for them to do. But then once I detached from that, I kind of swung to the other side of things. And I was like, I'm just not going to get that deeply involved. Just because I didn't want the drama, I didn't want all the extra stuff. I just wanted to focus on me and myself and growing and thriving. But I was in that space when I met my current partner. And in that healthy relationship, everything changed. It made me see myself in a way that I hadn't before, which wasn't always pretty. All right. And it was also shocking because back then I considered myself pretty self aware. But when you're loved in an authentic way, there's like no room for the filler stuff. Like it is straight up just them seeing you for you and loving you anyway. And because of that, the stuff that's not so you starts to become glaringly obvious. Like all the masks that you've worn this far in life just don't work with this person. Even the masks that you've convinced your own self of, because they are amplifying your authenticity in loving you that way. And in this dynamic is where I realized that the reason a lot of my past relationships and friendships struggled was because I wasn't being fully myself. Like after the first couple of incidences, I was suppressing myself so that abandonment wouldn't get triggered again. I had a tendency to fall into these bad people pleasing habits. And it taught me that sometimes I do have avoidant tendencies and that I was kind of emotionally repressed. I'm exposing myself, but I remember one time at the beginning of our relationship, we had an argument and he was expressing his feelings about it. And I remember just thinking, like, I don't know, like, I don't know, he might be too emotional for me. Oh, and in reality, the truth of it was just didn't really want anything to do with big emotions ever. Like I told you, the spot that I was at, I just wanted to do my own thing and not feel big emotions anymore because it felt too overwhelming. So if you're the hyper independent type of person in your relationships, I feel you. That was me. And I just want you to know that if you're being loved in a healthy, authentic way, that is the perfect place to finally put your guard down. Because that hyper independence, like we usually chalk it up to, that's just how I am. That's just me. But when in reality, a lot of the times it's just coming from a fear of not wanting to be disappointed. And it's not easy. It's scary to be that vulnerable. Like I said, it was like the biggest ego check of my life. But I think that was the point in my life where I started the transition from self awareness to self mastery. The difference in those two is like knowing you're hyper independent, like me being self aware that I'm hyper independent, and tipping the skills over to knowing that I have a tendency to be hyper independent. That's not who I am, it's just a tendency. And also not letting it hold me back from experiencing like real intimacy with people. And that was kind of like the catalyst to me learning all these spiritual and psychological concepts. Because when I discovered that part of myself, I was like, okay, what else has been holding me back? Because clearly this was a pattern that was going on for a long time and I had no idea. So, yeah, I just felt so much freer. Like a weight was off my shoulders finally. Like a weight was on my shoulders that had finally gotten taken off that I didn't even know was there or could be taken off. So my ego at the time was telling me that hyper independence was just part of who I was. And while, yes, that could be one of my traits, like independence can be one of my traits, the hyper independence part where I don't need anyone ever is the part that was actually holding me back. And really, really, it was just a defense mechanism to avoid having that wound triggered. So being loved properly forced me to confront those tendencies and habits and stuff by letting my guard down. And once I let my guard down and started to actually feel how much more authentic and freer I could be, it transformed a lot. It transformed not just me, but my relationships and how I show up in the world, how I deal with stress and how I deal with challenges. It's changed so much. Yeah, so I walk it like I talk it, you know? This isn't that trend on TikTok where influencers are giving advice that they don't use. Okay? But that's the benefit of learning your ego and learning when you're stuck in ego traps and telling the difference between your authentic self and, you know, the self story that you've been telling all these years just to protect yourself. That's why I make the content that I make on my channel, so we can all just feel freer and get that weight that we didn't know we had off of our shoulders. It's not easy work, but it's worth the work, if that makes sense. Okay, if you haven't, you should check out my Get Your Ego in Check playlist. I feel like that's relevant. And as always, I'm sending love and healing your way. Bye.